Wild Health is about optimizing you. We use genomics, blood work, biometrics, microbiome assessment, many other tests, and a conversation with you to come up with a full health optimization plan. What's the perfect diet, exercise, and supplement plan for you and only you? The Wild Health podcast is about optimizing all of us. Here we cover the cutting-edge science that gives you the base to be able to apply the personalized plan we give you as a patient. To sign up as a patient, go to wildhealth.com. Or if you're a physician or health coach and you want to learn how to do this for your patients, we're happy to help as well. Wildhealth.com for all the information on becoming a patient or working with us.
Thanks so much for listening to the Wild Health Podcast. If you're a Wild Health patient, you might not know, but you have access to our referral program. This gets your friends and family 25% off Wild Health services. Just head to Clarity, and in the top right corner, you'll see Refer a Friend. Click there, and you'll be brought to a page with your referral code. Happy sharing.
Hello, everyone. Wild Health World. For some reason, the adults are gone right now, and they left Carl Seeger to do some podcasting, which I don't know what Mike Stone was thinking there. He maybe wasn't thinking at all, but and even more so, we have Ed Gelman here, who is also one of the probably delinquent children of Wild Health. Ed's vice president of Wild Health at Wild Health, who focuses on advancing healthcare data and science and increasing precision medicine accessibility. And Ed is more recently adding generative AI tools into the mix, which is kind of where a lot of healthcare may be kind of heading towards. But so Ed holds a Master's of Information and Data Science from UC Berkeley, and his interest includes behavioral science, health economics, econometrics. You're gonna have to talk to me about that, unpack that for me, and machine learning. So Ed Gilman is here, and then we also are really lucky to have Dr. Andrew Hill, who's a founding director and lead neurotherapist for the Peak Brain Institute. And Dr. Hill is one of the top peak performance coaches in the country and holds a PhD in cognitive neuroscience from UCLA's Department of Psychology, and continues to do research on attention and cognition, which I think we all know. Anybody who's listening to this podcast knows that's dear to my heart. If they've heard me talk any all, that maybe attention is a thing of mine that maybe I don't hold well. But he does research methodology. His research methodologies include EEG, quantitative EEG, and then event-related potential testing, or ERP. And he's been practicing neurofeedback since 2003, which, like, you were cutting edge back then, man. And
that's early.
Yeah, that's early, buddy. That's super early. And then, in addition to founding the Peak Brain Institute, Dr. Hill hosts his podcast, the Head First podcast, with Dr. Hill, and he also lectures at UCLA, teaching courses of psychology, neuroscience, and gerontology, which is near and dear to our heart at Wild Health. So you two know each other. So you guys go way back, and I don't even know if I can say way back to Ed, because Ed, whenever I talk to you, I feel like you're 2 years old. And so going way back is like, I don't know, in the womb or something. Like
maybe a decade, right?
Yeah.
More? I forget when Ed was my student at UCLA, and then did some work with me at one of the companies we helped start. I forget when that was, though. It's all a blur to me because I'm old in memory, it kind of goes. But
yeah, you guys, well, I mean, first of all, usually I start these podcasts and I let Mike Stone start these podcasts. And he's like, better. I feel like I just read you guys' bios, but I really wanted to start with, like, I want to do like the Good Morning Vietnam start,
Okay.
But let's not do that. Let's actually start with you guys talking about how you guys met. And then Dr. Hill, if we could kind of just let's talk about where you guys met, and then let's go back to
Sure.
like what neurofeedback is, and talk about principles of neuroplasticity and all that, and then have you kind of go from there, if that's okay.
Sure. So you mentioned that I'm a gerontologist, which is like the study of aging or the process of aging.
Yeah.
And I think, Ed, you were my
Right.
student
That's
when you
right.
first hit UCLA, right? The freshman cluster. Yeah. So I was a fellow, a teaching fellow in this year-long sequence. UCLA has these freshman clusters where they bring in a cohort of freshmen and keep them together for the whole year through several classes, doing building deeper knowledge in certain areas, and then doing capstone projects. So they end up with, a specific area of mastery in a course area, as well as with sort of between 200 and about 30 little friends that they sort of make over the rest of their college experience. So Ed came in and was in my, what was the course?
sounds about right.
Psychology of Aging or Intro to Aging or something, gerontology course. And then I did a focus cluster group, a little smaller group in the spring. I think you were in that too, right? Were you in my class? Yeah. So I did a private little grad student teaching the undergrads, where we had project-based work and did a few other things in smaller groups. So and then after that, after I got my PhD from UCLA, I ended up opening up sort of biohacking style companies, and the first one had a mix addiction and non-addiction focus, like a wellness general and an addiction focus that was really all about this path of agency, this path of taking control of your brain, and the addiction side of it, which I wasn't deeply into. I wasn't the expert in the alcohol and drug stuff, but the people that were in that landscape were actually in a moderation landscape, not an abstinence landscape largely, which is very, very, attention getting in alcohol, certainly.
Yeah.
And we grew the neurofeedback side of the company so separately, and we served all the needs of the folks in the addiction side. And the neurofeedback or brain training side of the company kind of outgrew the other half of the company over the next 2-3 years. And we split off into what's called Peak Brain now. And that was 7.5 years ago that Peak Brain started. So we've been doing this brain training thing ever since. And I think we sent Ed off to, wrote him a letter of rec or something and sent him off to, because he was our intern at the first company, Alternatives was the name of the company. We didn't pay you because that was something that I wasn't the controlling partner of that company, so you can't blame me perhaps, but
but you wrote the letter of rec. You wrote the letter of rec, and so now we ended up with him. So
okay,
yeah,
all right.
I feel like
You're
I
welcome.
put that back on you. Yeah, no, we. Thank
I'm
you.
sorry, or you can
Thank
blame
you.
me, or whichever you feel.
I'm sorry, or you're welcome.
Both. I mean, I'm sure some days. No, I'm kidding. So,
yeah, why don't you? Can you?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I guess I'd just like to hear, like, I have my concept of what neurofeedback is, but I'd like to hear, like, you're the expert, man. Like, I definitely like to hear that, and how does that relate to brain activity and the
And how
principles
dangerous
of
is
like
this?
neuroplasticity?
How
Yeah,
dangerous is
sure.
this that you could have led
So
me,
neurofeedback's.
help you?
What was that?
Probably not.
Yeah, couldn't have been that dangerous if Ed
No,
was
no.
involved, right?
No. Neurofeedback is a pretty straightforward process. It's mysterious only because people are unique. Like personal training is mysterious too, because everyone responds a bit differently, and you have to pay attention. You have to look at their individual data. You have to iterate. There's not a through line for someone's goals in personal training when they walk in that necessarily ahead of time. It's more like, okay, these goals, these lipids. Okay, here's some strategies with your metabolism to hack yourself in the right direction. And in the brain stuff, neurofeedback has been used mostly for the past 60 years by therapists in a therapeutic context. It was discovered in the late 60s at UCLA, actually, this style of neurofeedback that most of the field does. And it was discovered on cats. Cats are pretty bad instruction followers. It's not really a voluntary process. It's involuntary operant conditioning or shaping of the brain. Most forms of neurofeedback are like that. So what you'll do is you'll stick a wire or two to the head and measure the brain as it changes moment to moment on its own. And whenever it happens to change a little more in the direction you would like to exercise, you applaud the brain. You applaud that change, that parameter, with auditory or visual typically. And so the brain's hearing, oh, good job, brain, good job, brain, good job, brain, nope. Good job, good job, good job, nope. For certain runs of brain waves it engages in every so often. And it starts to notice, hey, wait a minute. Oh, dropping my alpha's doing something? Okay, cool. And it starts to lean into that. It's almost all involuntary, though, because you can't feel your brain waves. So it's this shaping or operant conditioning, but of an involuntary behavior. The brain itself has no sensory nerve endings. You can't feel your brain, ironically. It's doing all the feeling, but it can't feel, which is probably good because the brain's actually fairly active. We think of the heart as a moving organ. The brain also is a moving organ. It actually physically pulses a little bit and has all kinds of acids and electricity and bursting bits. And if you could feel it, you'd be miserable, is my guess. So we were designed so we can't actually have any sensation of it. But that means you sort of bypass. Neurofeedback is a form of biofeedback, but that conjures the idea of like voluntary relaxation and paying attention to your heartbeat or something else voluntarily. And that is a form, that loop of attending to the stimulus that's not normally perceptible in a way that lets you then train it or shape the stimulus, like your heart rate variability or galvanic skin response or hand warming. It's biofeedback. But central nervous system, everything inside of it is imperceptible in terms of direct experience. You can't feel your brainwaves firing. So that becomes this involuntary exercise. So the classic neurofeedback, the field of it was developed around a brainwave called sensory motor rhythm. If you've seen a cat in a windowsill, that liquid body and laser-like focus is a super high SMR state. So Sturm at UCLA was actually doing operant conditioning. He was squirting chicken broth into the mouths of cats whenever they made more SMR, little bursts of it. And 6 months later, the cats that had been conditioned ended up becoming seizure resistant to toxins.
So Andrew, you might want to, for our audience, like some people aren't going to know what SMR is. Do you want to unpack that?
Sure. Yeah. So SMR is a brainwave. It's in the beta brainwaves. Beta is like in the teens. SMR is a little rhythm that runs about 12 to 15 times per second. And brainwaves in general, you can think of the brain, it's many layers. The top layer, the cortex or the bark, is quite a large surface area, all kind of wrinkled up against the top of the brain. And you have what are called microcolumns or sometimes mini columns, these little clusters of cells, about 30,000 neurons and maybe up to 100,000 glial cells or support cells that sit in this column, this computational unit. And that little group of cells will discharge. It'll fire its electricity all at once. And the whole little 30,000 unit is kind of like a binary, 1 or 0 based on how it's firing, or more accurately, it's rhythmically firing at a certain rate. And then layers in that column will make connections to some local neighbors and some faraway neighbors. And then that creates information flow by changing the brain waves in a column or in many of the millions of columns we have. So when a column's hanging out, bouncing at 12 times per second, and that's on the motor strip that runs ear to ear, that's a motorically calm state, a physically relaxed state, able to sit still, to pump the brakes internally and not get reactive. It's a high sensory motor rhythm state, SMR state, or low beta state.
Yeah.
And cats do it naturally all the time. This is why cats can fall asleep instantly too and then wake up. It's SMR they're manipulating, because SMR is also called sleep spindles by neurologists.
Yeah.
Same phenomena.
Okay.
It's used in many ways, but it's this little burst of beta waves that does things. Mostly it pumps the brakes so you don't wake up when you hear a car go by, or you don't go squirrel when something interesting happens. So the calm cat in the windowsill watching birds is literally the opposite of ADHD, literally, which is a low SMR and a high theta state, which is lubrication on the circuits. So if you stick wires in the head on the areas involved with controlling behavior, you controlling your behavior voluntarily, and you measure the SMR low beta waves moment to moment and the theta moment to moment, and you applaud the brain whenever it shifts towards more beta and less theta, after several days of that, the brain starts to move in that direction, and then it creates changes in the resources. And after 5-6 sessions, you feel it. After 2 or 3 weeks, you're getting movement. After 6 or 8 weeks, you can actually measure the brain and see the differences you've been creating. So it's this progressive training process on the EEG, if you will.
And
Sure.
yeah, of course you do. No, I guess I think maybe what you're getting to there, Ed, is like, let's talk about like what are the applications to that? Like, where's the like the actual applications, and then also like at some point I'd like to hear your thoughts on what are the potential applications maybe coming on the forefront and down the road.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah. So the things that respond really well to neurofeedback are the gross features of our brain that you can see from the outside. And also they're the things that all brains do. And you can see from the outside gross features of anxiety, executive function, sleep, speed of processing. Just through an EEG, you can see, so for instance, there's a circuit in the front middle of the head whose job it is to help you decide what you're thinking about, called the anterior cingulate. It's one in the back called the posterior. And they do jobs all the time. When you're like not forgetting what you're thinking about, thank you, anterior cingulate. When you're going, watch the road, thank you, posterior cingulate. You know, it did its job. Wonderful. These guys cramp up, though, and when they cramp up into high gear, they become little red blobs on a data read. So I could put a cap on your head, measure your brain at rest, and say, whoa, your cingulates are kind of active, kind of cramped up a little bit. And I wouldn't know if it was in the way for you, but I would think it might be. I would say, what's plausible is that sometimes when the anterior cingulate cramps up, people obsess a little bit. They perseverate, get stuck in their head. Is that something you care about? Is it important to you? Is it real? And then same thing in back midline. When that's really activated, somebody becomes perhaps kind of threat sensitive, activated. They ruminate. But maybe it's a CEO and not OCD in the front. Maybe it's a lifeguard and not a PTSD or threat sensitivity in the back.
Yeah. So
I don't know.
Andrew, I typically think of like amygdala and for PTSD and that sort of activation there. I don't think about what you're talking about. Is there like data around like, hey,
Tons.
like take all comers, you slap your device on there and you say that person has a history of trauma, PTSD, or has that sort of likely diagnosis.
Yep.
And that person has OCD, and we can look at that and then go back, interview, and
yes, but the outliers in the brain are not as precise as the diagnostic language because they're actually probably more valid. Like front midline theta is a thing that shows up in OCD, in intrusive thought, in ticking and picking, in claustrophobia, in agoraphobia, in all kinds of things. But it can also be a natural variant. And people are weird. So you're seeing population metrics in a brain mapping situation. So you're saying, hey, here's some things that are outliers. Let's model them. Let's talk about the neuroscience that is plausible. So 3 of these things matter to you? Okay, I think we're in the ballpark of things you care about. Great.
Right? Where you're going to see a whole bunch of weirdnesses in a human if you do some sort of imaging, and not all of them are relevant.
Yeah, exactly. People are very variable. Whether you do an fMRI or a SPECT or an X-ray or CT or anything, you see huge variability. Brain mapping or quantitative EEG takes your resting brain and then does an age-match population comparison. So all the data you're looking at is in like bell curve type heat map sense. So I can say to you, and the question you asked a minute ago, Dr. Seeger, are there diagnostically valid patterns? Not exactly is a short answer. Not really. We call them phenotypes or endophenotypes more accurately. And some of them rise to the level of predictive, like the ADHD phenotype. Monastra found in the 80s and 90s that the ratio of theta to beta at the top of the head, the vertex, can blindly sort kids into ADHD and non-ADHD buckets 94% accurately. And if you see front midline theta, someone perseverates, but they might not have OCD. Maybe it's fine for you.
Can I ask a question on that? If we feel like it's that accurate, why has this not become a diagnostic modality for ADHD as opposed to like the current modalities, which is often like not, and I feel like Kristen
we don't
Dawson
diagnose.
It's gonna flog me, but we're sending home, we're sending application or like forms for teachers to fill out, right?
What is a diagnosis? It's not until very recently. The DSM-5, the current versions are starting to put in information in the DSM, the diagnostic criteria that include mechanism of the problem. But up until very, very recently, nothing diagnostically has included the mechanism. It's a collection of presentation of symptoms. And you can have ADHD-like symptoms from a concussion or from anxiety or from 1,000 things. And so the diagnostic labels are actually less precise than the physiology. So when you find someone's physiology and talk about it, you can work backwards and say, whoa, okay. Like if someone has a high theta beta ratio, they're going to respond well to stimulants because that's an ADHD brain. But if someone has tons of, cingulate beta and they're really tired from it because they're anxious and tired, not sleeping and spacey, and someone says, oh, I think you have ADHD, and you look at the brain and you see all this activation, that's where the utility goes. It's sort of like Flynn's, the wheat from the chaff, and figure out what's plausible, what fits the presentation, what makes sense, and start to demystify information.
So maybe it's like all things, it depends, but it's you have population-based studies that this is what your testing modality looks like, and then you pair that with the patient's symptoms, and then you intervene to see if that you get changes in your brain waves, and if that relieves
and your performance and your
changes performance. Yes.
Yeah. Because we always do executive function testing alongside a resting brain map. Brain maps don't change day to day to day. They're the same at a high level. You look the same every day, essentially, compared to the average person your age. Your performance fluctuates a little bit day to day. But if we snapshot your performance and find crazy ADHD or distractibility or fatigue or burnout, and we see patterns in your brain that often go along with those exact things, we're not doing science or medicine, we're not doing medicine or psychology. We're doing science. We're doing cognitive neuroscience, putting physiology and behavior in contrast and seeing what sticks out. But to teach someone about their goals and their resources, not necessarily to apply a top-level label. So, and people are variable, and what is a problem is often contextual. I mean, take something silly like height. If you're 6'7", that's unusual, but it's great if you're on a basketball court. It's not so good if you're trying to be a jockey. It's a problem at that point. Like you'd have contextual perspective on your data. So when I'm pointing out your speed of processing compared to the average person your age, or your tendency to get distracted, your tendency to hyperfocus, and I can describe it to you, now you get to decide if it's important to you to change. Or maybe it's a great quirk about yourself that you enjoy. Not everything we find is, many things we find are not problematic.
There's a big precision
just different
twist
people
here,
are
right?
weird,
As you were saying, with the responds well to stimulants versus doesn't. That sounds to me like a great tool to throw into the mix as we're trying to figure out what's going to work for somebody and what's not.
It should be, yeah, and usually is. Usually people are super excited to see it. Peak Brain also has this open-ended access thing, so we teach people to read their own brain mapping data and their own performance testing, and then we provide unlimited access to the offices for regathering. And we often do what's called neurofeedback and change their brain with them. But even if they don't do neurofeedback, they're mapping their brain every so often and looking at these changes building up from hyperbaric medicine or psychology or meditation or psychotherapy or anything else they're doing, or medication changes. I can't tell you the number of contrast maps I've done in California and New York at this point with caffeine, cannabis, Adderall, and clean brain maps, and looking at the 4 states somebody dials themselves into day to day. And they have massive agency when they go, whoa, Adderall does make me super awake. Oh, but my performance actually isn't any better, and I'm starting to make commission errors? Oh yeah, I am. Oh yeah, maybe I'm taking too much Adderall. But not me as a doctor saying your Adderall might be in the way, but hey, here's your brain clean, here's your brain with Adderall. Here's some performance differences. That's and then your brain maps are changing in this direction. You would think it's all agency, all exciting, and usually people are just like blown away and happy to look at it and very excited. I also have folks where they say, oh yeah, I asked my kid's psychiatrist if they want to look at this brain data you gathered, and she got mad at me. Yeah, because it was out of scope, out of her expertise area. And I have a deal. All our clients, their doctors can come get their brains mapped. I will do a cold read on you and tell you lots of things about yourself with zero information if you're a skeptic. Happy to. You will not be a skeptic after that, generally. Yeah. But no, I every so often get a psychiatrist who gets like angry at neurofeedback and thinks it's a quackery thing, and doesn't have the open mind to look at data.
Well, so. I mean, I guess if we're talking about that, like you should bring it up, and I don't want to lose the thought about what you see kind of coming down the pipe for uses for neurofeedback.
That's easy, yeah.
But what are the limitations to neurofeedback? Because that's right? And what's the downside?
Yeah, well, it only works on these gross features. I mean, you get a plasticity boost. There's good literature showing that even a single session of neurofeedback causes a big boost of plasticity for about 24 hours after every session. So you actually get other indirect effects. I get personal trainers and OTs and PTs calling me and saying, my client walked in without a cane. What are you doing? That's so weird. I've been working with her for 8 years, and this is the first day she's ever had balance and no cane. Oh, cool. I wasn't working on their balance. I was working on her anxiety and her sleep.
Yeah.
But the plasticity was so high, the PT got in finally and landed, and suddenly her balance was better, is what happened in that example. So when you work the brain out, you can't really just work out one thing. So you do get a global effect, but the resources I go after are sleep, stress, attention, and speed. Those underpin many, many things. So executive function, any flavor of it, any flavor of ADHD pretty much, you can spot on a brain map. Most flavors of anxiety, and by the way, the amygdala has no EEG. Can't see it.
Yeah, that's what I was, right.
No EEG.
Yeah,
and the amygdala's about learning. The amygdala's not about the trauma response. It's about the learning of the adverse experience. The trauma response is about the posterior cingulate. Watch the road, heads up, danger, Will Robinson. You know, or below it, the periaqueductal gray. When you slam your thumb with a hammer, the moment of relief you get after the pain goes away, that's the dumping of enkephalons and endorphins into your central nervous system by the PAG. It feels pain from emotional stuff too.
I remember the term PAG, but the periaqueductal gray. Yeah.
PAG.
You lost me on that one. I was like, okay.
Periaqueductal gray tissue that sits around the cerebral aqueduct in the middle of the brain. And it dumps morphines, natural or endorphins into your system if you have extreme physical pain, like you hit your thumb with a hammer or cut something off. And I was taught that growing up, and this is how it all works. And then recently, Sieber and Fisher, who's a great psychologist who works in trauma, dug into some imaging data and discovered that PAG becomes pre-alerted for adverse experiences throughout life and is actually the thing that drives developmental and attachment trauma, CPTSD. So it's before the posterior cingulate, walk the road. One level before that is a little voice going, you were traumatized a while ago. Don't forget it. That's the PAG. It reminds you that you might go wrong. It's not the threat itself, but it's the thing that's shaming you for missing the threat once before a long time ago.
Yeah, that sounds like a part of your brain that you both love and hate at the
You need
same
it.
time.
You don't want to be tranquilized.
No, it saves your ass, but it also gives you lots of problems later. Yeah.
So, well, the cost of missing danger is so high that we're biased to latch on to that negativity. You can miss pleasurable things all day long, but you miss a tiger once and it might be game over.
Yeah, right.
I like hanging out with Dr. Hill because I just get a full lecture every single dang time, and so I think that's a good enough reason to talk about the performance stuff and like why would somebody want this, because we talked about ADHD, but we also talked about anxiety. Some of that's a clinical, some of that's performance, well-being, and what's coming down the pipe there.
Yeah.
But either way, you might want to change your impulsivity or your stamina or your sustained focus or your vigilance or your depth of sleep or your speed of processing, which is retrieval of words and information flow in your mind. Those are things you can see and measure. And here's the big trick in neurofeedback. We can't understand our brain really well. It's this population level, modeling game. But if we see something, we can change it. So, hey, this is important to you? Okay, cool. Sorry, experiencing that. Ooh, this might be fun to work on. Let's see what happens. So it ends up becoming, it's sort of mysterious but not blind, the process of neurofeedback, because you're like, this is weird. Wait a minute. I feel something. That's kind of cool. So, it's pretty approachable in that particular way. Executive function's a big driver. I don't care if you have ADHD and you're some kid who's not able to, do their homework, or you're a high-level CEO who's making billions. We all have executive function that's variable across the day and the time. And many of us, especially high-performance individuals and people that are suffering with deficits, will have difficulties in executive function regulation, sleep, accumulated, stress or wear and tear, or a lot of my high-performing, athletes or executives or musician types, they've all got maybe acquired problems from their jobs, so to speak. The actor, has social anxiety that only gets triggered when she's doing red carpet speeches, but not when doing, when learning lines. Or if actors come in because they are getting too old and too drunk to remember their lines. And you work their brains out and clean it all up, and now they're winning their improv classes and off book one read again after a few months. So a little bit of the point is, it doesn't matter what the diagnostic label is. What really matters is what your goals are. And goals are executive function, sleep onset, sleep maintenance, speed of processing improving, and most of the anxiety stuff, the selection of the stress versus attention control stuff. It's pretty tractable. So it becomes more like, well, here's your brain. What do you want to do? And even before you make a change, if I show you stuff, I show your anterior cingulate being obsessive, your posterior cingulate having a trauma response, your right tempoparietal junction being a little sensitive to the social and sensory information coming in. If I show it to you and say, is this something you deal with? And you're like, oh my gosh, yes, I do experience that. Well, there it is. It's just your brain. Great. Oh, it's annoying that you've some suffering. Oh, it's annoying, but it's just your brain. And even before you do anything, it has this impact of people going, oh yeah, I'm annoyed at that. And it can hurt. There can be a lot of suffering. They can be frustrated, but being ashamed of it or feeling guilty of it starts to suddenly drop away. And feeling out of control of it starts to drop away. Even when it's really intrusive stuff. Oh yeah, I am kind of hyper-focused. And most of the anxiety flavor stuff and the ADHD stuff is also not disease process. When it's dysregulated, it's an existing natural resource, kind of strong and stuck in one of its modes. So between that natural education of here's how your brain works and externalizing it as a thing that's actually happening, not a thing you're doing voluntarily, this starts to flip people's relationship into something where they're not afraid of their brain, they understand it better, and they can progressively move through changes. And yet neurofeedback is one of those things, but so is, learning how your sleep hacking works and learning how your acetone and ketones work in your bloodstream and playing with some of these metrics so you can steer the system. So
yeah, I think, but I guess one thing is, what do you think what's the downside, right?
Yeah,
with doing this for people.
The downside of neurofeedback, it's manageable, but the downsides are that if you do the wrong thing, it doesn't land the right way. So if you train your brain the wrong way, it won't feel like anything right away. Neurofeedback takes a couple of sessions to kick in. But if you train somebody, let's say, who's threat sensitive and kind of ruminating, to be really, really focused, you're likely to drive up that sense of anxiety, for instance. It's transient. It happens for half an hour and a half, like kind of subtle in the background, like, wait a minute, I kind of feel something. And it wears off. Or maybe your sleep that night's kind of screwed up. You can't fall asleep very easily. You wake up a lot. You dream more or something. And you go, I don't think I liked that protocol yesterday. I might have felt a little bit weird. Okay. You back off. You adjust. You look at the brain maps, figure out why. And you get a different effect the next time after adjusting. The problems in neurofeedback come when you ignore the side effect. Oh, this must be good for me. I'm going to keep going. And you make the side effect itself stronger and stronger and stronger and then permanent. Or when the system you've been given to train your brain is one of these one-size-fits-all systems where the software is magical and it does all the adjusting. Those systems are weak T at best and actually cause a fair amount of
Is that a feature that could get
building
solved,
up
though,
negative
do you think,
problems
eventually,
for folks.
with a better technology, better mapping, better protocols, better AI?
Well, I've seen thousands and thousands of clients. I can count on one hand the number of clients that I couldn't actually move in the right direction, let alone create adverse. Every client has a little bit of like, ooh, I felt kind of wired after that or kind of tired after that protocol. And that's going to the gym. You feel a little bit. But there's a difference between being like, whoa, I dropped eggs on the floor at the supermarket because my arms are noodles, and like there's pain and there's damage and I can't, function the next day. And we work with our clients daily to make sure their sleep, their stress, their mood, their attention, the subjective impact is what it should be, so we don't like get them training themselves off in the wrong direction and producing progressive problems. That's the risk of neurofeedback, is the progressive iteration into the wrong direction. But almost any form of neurofeedback is fairly gentle. There are some forms that operate a little faster, but even those take 3, 4, 5, 10 sessions to create change. So the rule of thumb becomes, don't do the thing again that felt weird. and make sure you communicate with the person who's helping you guide what you're doing. And there's a very good chance the way in which you felt weird isn't only not a big deal because it wears off, but it's useful. Oh, you slept less well after this left side beta? Oh, okay, let's try half a hertz slower then, because you're clearly built a little differently. And the next day you get a different effect. So because it's not permanent right away, you have this freedom to sort of iterate and gently move ahead and validate the effects you're getting before you really get to that permanent place. And then we map the brain every other month. So we're actually going back to the science and tracking the more high-level data to make sure we understand what we're doing. And between that, we're asking our clients every day, you know, how's your sleep? How's your day? How's your stress? How's your mood? How's your drinking? How's your anger at your mother-in-law? And we just learn the variability of it. And then when one day when they're, you know, have a discontinuous response, we're like, oh yeah, that's not typical for him. Awesome sleep, yay! Or he's in a bad mood. He's never in a bad mood. Maybe we're pushing him a little bit hard. Let's see what his last protocol was and change it maybe. So as long as you do that piece of it, you're working with somebody who's got this iterative and, you know, listening to you kind of piece of it going on, then I think that people don't get like the wrong effects. And the worst that will happen is it takes longer because your brain's really weird or unusual. It can take a long time for a few people here and there. But neurofeedback against the other forms of change people experience, when I say things take a long time, it's only some of these, you know, hard to work on phenomena or hard to work on brains. Most things in neurofeedback change dramatically faster than traditional medication. I mean, in executive function stuff, ADHD type phenomena, we tend to get a full standard deviation every other month of change. And people do 3 months of neurofeedback, about 40 sessions, 3 times a week, and they make 2 or 3 standard deviations of change, and it's just there now. And you can come back 6 months later, and there's good literature in ADHD on 6 months, 12 months, 5 years, and 10 years even, showing good stability. So since we provide the access to the data to our clients without charge, they double down and engage with this agency perspective and go back and do more brain mapping and meditate a lot and engage with secondary healthy habits, which is kind of our trick, is to, you know, now that they're well stabilized, to toss other stuff down that
like there's this
channel of education, like sleep hacking
component that you need from both your practitioner and from the person coming to you for help.
Yeah, the client needs to both have some sense of what their goals are, and they need to be reflecting back, especially the day after every session, if we are muck or poloing our way towards their goals or not, if we are eliciting subjective experiences of any sort. It's not. No, it's hard actually for some folks. Yeah.
So ADHD, executive functioning, performance.
Seizures. I'm not a medical person, but the field has a huge amount of seizure impact. It was discovered because of epilepsy, because of seizures. But the average, Sturman did a review article in 2012 or 14 showing the average amount of impact on seizures is a reduction of 50%. And I've never seen a result as poor as 50%. Always seen more than that. It's always fairly dramatic, just ramping down people's seizure activity. Migraines, same kind of thing. Just ramp it down over time. Using vascular training, use infrared tools, and measure blood flow in the brain as heat surges around. I forget, Eddie, did we use HEG? Did we use blood flow tools at Alternatives back when you were there? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we throw a headset on Eddie and give him an infrared sensor that measures waves of heat flowing off the brain. You concentrate or think happy thoughts, and that vascular tone starts to climb, and migraines go away, and brain fog gets broken up. And I don't know why, we get better social function in Asperger's and autism as well from frontal training of that blood flow. So, but again, I'm not trying to treat the autism or treat the migraine. I'm trying to help someone understand how their brain works and, you know, take control themselves ultimately. But there's a lot we can do. So,
are there patients that come to you with either specific goals or, patients who come to you that are not good candidates or examples where you're like, this isn't going to go well?
Sure. I can't say that I have always known who those people were when I was younger in practice. And I've also often been practicing in a landscape where I've had a psychologist as part of the team or nearby. And so some people for whom it would have been extra hard to just do neurofeedback, I had other resources. But, in the past 3 years, I've had at least 2 people with schizotypal, schizophreniform, intrusive stuff.
Yeah.
And they would not see traditional psych, and they had exhausted that in their, after 30, 40, 50 years of it, and they were fairly disorganized, but they were going to come in 3 times a week and train their brain. And they did not make the amazing linear change most of us make, but they made changes. It took twice as long, both these guys. But, suddenly I'm like, wait a minute, that email that came in from him had grammar. He capitalized? Wait, hey, how's this guy doing? He came in showered? Nice. And it was someone who said, I have a lot of anxiety and I find my creativity is too high and I imagine things. And I would like to get control of my mind. And so he would give us these really rambling reports every morning of his sleep and how much food he didn't digest and, really flight of ideas stuff. And gradually saw that language get more and more organized. We just helped him learn his brain. So, it's kind of a fun thing. But the people who I would say that it's not a good fit for are folks for whom there's no physiological component to their complaint, first of all. Or I do have colleagues that work very, very successfully with this population, but I find, because I don't do therapy, I'm not a therapist, I'm a trainer, I'm a coach and an educator for folks, that it's called Axis 2, end of diagnosis, is very difficult. These are the relational things. Narcissism, borderline. Yeah, all the difficulty of injured relational stuff that has created different ways of interacting with the world. Neurofeedback can do a lot there, actually, but it should do a lot in the context of the therapeutic thing you may need, because that's a very complicated thing that is, the psychology of that is at least as involved as the physiology, the learning involved. But most flavors of anxiety, that is not true. You could have profound Tourette's or a tic or hand-washing OCD or intrusive thoughts where you're hallucinating. Just your brain. Train the brain, change the phenomena. But, yeah.
One of what I've kind of always saw is when I thought about neurofeedback is there's a significant barrier to this is around location and accessibility. And so that when I think of neurofeedback, you got to be in a big city and have a university nearby. Talk to me about that. Where are we at in the world in accessibility for patients?
It's mixed. When I got involved in the field more than 20 years ago, there were a good solid 5,000 to 8,000 practitioners in the U.S., and I think there's fewer now because the field has been aging out, because it's this very complicated kind of black art for a lot of the way it's taught, and apprenticeships are taught, and also. On the same token, the access is improving in the technology and the approachability of stuff. So when I first got involved in the field, we needed 2 separate computers connected by a parallel cable and 2 monitors, and you couldn't use one computer. There wasn't enough processing power, And this wasn't this was in the 90s. It wasn't that long ago that I was doing that, right?
Which we like to talk, or at least I do. Which kind of Pearl Jam album are we talking here? Time frame? Are we talking?
Oh, this is pre-Pearl Jam.
Wait,
was it? No, it wasn't actually.
No,
it was post Pearl Jam.
Yeah. So we're talking 92 was 10.
This would have been in 94 that I'm talking about. So I was. They were not that exciting anymore. They were kind of old hat. They were mainstream by then.
Still exciting to this day, man. I just don't.
But they were mainstream by the mid 90s. They were no longer
Hey, Dad, what's Pearl Jam?
You know what I'm saying?
Okay, it does. Yeah, exactly. Do you want, Andrew?
It's a really nice jam.
Yeah. Side note, Andrew. It's complete side note. Ed and I were at a retreat center together. We were doing a company retreat, and we went into this spa, and somebody asked, basically Ed if he was here with his dad and me.
Oh,
I was his dad.
Nice. We should give it a mustache. I can see it. Yeah.
Yeah, just because you have a mustache doesn't mean you have a
Well, here we were talking about precision medicine,
I don't
and
think
it was
that
just the whole wrong read of the situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So funny.
Yeah. So I guess access. Sorry, we're focused on access. Like, where is
Yeah.
that?
So again, the field has been shrinking a little bit because it's a knowledge-based area that does take a few years of learning for many of the practitioners. And yet we're also getting fitness trackers and sleep trackers. And I mean, the cost of gear is one of the amps that I send people home with. This is less than $1,000 now for training, for EEG systems. So the cost of hardware and software and everything else is coming down. The knowledge cost is still in a little bit of a siloed place in many of the ways people would like to get access. So Peak Brain, my company, has offices in several cities, and you can go to our office physically, but about 80% of our clients never see our offices. We send gear to you. We map your brain from home. We teach you how to stick wires to your head and run software, and we have coaches who run with you 7 days a week and teach you things and nudge you to do your stuff and fill out your sleep surveys. And
so you're doing this remotely?
We're doing traditional neurofeedback, not one size fits all. We aren't selling you a kit that self-runs. Yeah. We're doing neurofeedback with you, tracking progress, touching base with you, but teaching you to become your own, biohacker, stick wires to your head or your kid's head, and then check in with us for wire placement or for effects and learn to move through it themselves. Yeah. So
wow.
That's
wherever
you like to be in the world, if you wish.
That's pretty. But do you feel like, have you been, and maybe you've been tracking this or not, but do you feel like you have same results in people doing this on their own versus people doing it in person? Like, what is that? In my mind, going in person seems like a better deal,
Don't tell my clients in the office this, but clients who work from home get better results.
Oh, yeah. Let's unpack that, buddy.
There's a few things there. One, in my offices, it's 3 times a week. At home, you got the gear, you got the brain, you got the goals. You want to crank it up? Okay, let's crank it up and try some more stuff and do another session here and there. So instead of 40 sessions, it's 50 over 3 months. That is a big difference in dosing, actually. That's one reason. 2, if you're learning to stick a wire to your head, learning a protocol, observing your sleep, and you're doing it at home yourself and structuring your own workout plan and logging your own experiences, the way you engage with it's a little bit different than coming in and being asked if you slept or if you were focused today and sitting down and having tea while something's done to you, quote unquote. So the agency and the education piece is so much deeper when you're self-training. You lean into it more and you try more stuff and you get more out of it. And you do more neurofeedback. And it costs the same as our office-based programs based on the number of months. So this is why 80% of our clients are doing it from home, because they have the control over it. And the ones that technology is confusing or their kid won't do what they tell them to, they come in, But most of our clients just say, hey, that protocol was great. Can I do another one like that today? Oh, yeah. Let's try this one for you today. And then they just go and they do their neurofeedback and they talk to us later.
Do you have patients that originally show up at an office and then transition to
Yep, we do. We have offices in New York City, LA, Orange County, California, and St. Louis. And
no Denver? No Denver?
No Denver. We actually have a lot of clients in Denver, an awful lot actually, but they're all working from home directly. And we're also opening up right now in London and Stockholm, and we have some partners in other places like Wellington and Sydney and other. We're pretty far flung, but most of our clients will, again, start remotely. Those that are near one of the offices will often be like, get the brain map done. But I have plenty of clients that just come into the office for mapping and train from home still because they live in LA. You can't get across town sometimes.
Yeah.
So,
be in Denver. Yeah.
Right. They live 12 miles away. It's a 2-hour drive, perhaps. So it's the wrong time of day. So I do have clients who do both. And often clients are concerned about the complexity of, I'm not sure I can handle this. I'm going to do it in the office. And then like a week or two in, they're like, oh, hey, can I get a kit and do this from home? This is pretty cool. I can do this.
Yeah.
And then we teach you. We spend the first 2 weeks at least live, sticking wires, double-checking signals, teaching you the basics. I joke that folks who go through our 3-month programs for their own self-training, they are more skilled than junior techs are at EEG centers.
Yeah.
They know signals. They can run data. They can troubleshoot 60 hertz noise because their friend has the air conditioner on in the next room. So it's a skill set we give them. So they get deeper into it, and they tend to get more out of it when they do that. Yeah. So,
all right. So last question is, all right, what's on the horizon? What's coming? What's coming down the
yeah,
chute?
so ultimately, I mean, we're really focused on this access and agency play, right? So I alluded to the fact that earlier I mentioned that most providers are therapists, and that's wonderful. I think there's a really, really good need for therapy and neurofeedback as a blend, even with the same practitioner. I love that, especially for things like, deeply psychological stuff like borderline or narcissism or OCPD or something. But I also think that because of the brain drain and the people aging out of the field, even in New York City, if you wanted to go to a regular provider, it's like $300 to $400 a session now. In LA, same thing. In St. Louis, it's like $200 a session because they're therapists doing one-on-one work. And there's less access to it now than there was before. So we've taken the thing on remote. Our fees are dramatically lower than that where we're under the $100 now a session rate usually. And we want to take that further and move the sort of coaching piece of it into software, fitness trackers for the brain, so we can be coaching. We actually cobbled together one that all of our clients use, where they log their sleep, their stress, their mood, their attention, their drinking, their anger, whatever they're working on, and we see it fluctuate day to day, and we reflect back to them, hey, we see this. Thank you for letting us know. Try this. That's the coaching loop. I call it the RRA cycle in house, the reflect, review, and act cycle. Put yourself in the client's perspective, reflect on their experience, reflect back to them what's going on after you've reviewed their experience, provide an action or an intervention, start all over again. That's the coaching cycle we use. And I think that piece of it's great. But I also think that my phone knows, how many carbs I had today because I track it in my fitness tracker. It knows how much sleep I got last night because my Oura Ring told it. Ultimately, we're going to the place, I think, of intelligent agents doing personalized, not just personalized predictions, but like avatars. I think we're going to have Ed's going to have a small Ed on the phone that he's going to say, hey, virtual Ed, how would this med treat me? And the virtual Ed will say, oh, based on genetics and experience and this med is not good for you because of these reasons. I think that's the personalized medicine value with massive data, AI, and I've been thinking this for years, but now I think it's probably going to happen like tomorrow instead of in 10 years or 20 years.
It feels that way now.
I mean, I was probably teaching some of these like transformation technology coming, in our classes 10 years ago, I guess, Ed. Some of this was a hint, but now we're hurtling towards dynamic technology that's going to react to our needs in a way that, I mean, I have the UCLA health system as my doctors. I have a really bad experience over the past 6 months seeing a doctor who's like just not interested in listening to me or asking questions or hearing about a diagnosis, just not interested because it's not in their area of expertise or they don't think it is or whatever. One of the better health care systems in the world, roundly underwhelmed by them, roundly. And what they really need is not just like a dashboard of all my test results. They need like a little tiny, intelligent avatar that can like start collecting things and making associations and giving people coaching. Hey, your sleep's doing that. Try this, and surfacing, stuff for them. Things I imagine Wild Health does at the coaching level for a lot of their clients. It's the sort of intermediate piece of here's the doctor's recommendations, but here's the ways I'm going to talk to you about getting that stuff done. The coaching aspects.
Yeah, and technology is definitely being part of what we're bringing in there, and more so. That's Ed's job. But but one of the questions I had do people ever? And you can be like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. But partner with like EMDR therapists doing EMDR.
Oh, sure, absolutely they do.
Brain spotting would be another one. We just did a podcast on brain spotting. That people are looking at your neurofeedback data around that and being like, okay,
all the
that's
time,
the spot.
the time, both EMDR and brain spotting and somatic experiencing therapists, and they send people to us all the time for two reasons. One, some people get kind of activated through brain spotting or EMDR, and they're it's a hard process for someone. It's not always, it's like exposure therapy for OCD. It's not always enjoyable right afterwards. You're kind of not super well regulated. So for those people, they go to EMDR, come to neurofeedback, and do a state shift back down to ground. more common, folks aren't getting what they want. They aren't getting the shifts. There's something in the way. And so you do neurofeedback and send them to EMDR, and they have breakthrough experiences. And that's just the plasticity thing generally, but you can also do what's called alpha-theta neurofeedback, which is reliable access to nonlinear hypnagogic access consciousness stuff. So like, I do this for CEOs, high-powered linear guys, and their wives call me, whatever you did, do it again. We had the best therapy session ever. I don't care what it was, do it again.
Hit the repeat button on that.
Yeah. Oh my God, I was so sensitive. I was a good listener. Oh my gosh, I love that. Do it again. Yeah.
I mean, I guess the next natural if you're talking about mental health in the mental health space right now, the next natural question is, are people pairing this with psychedelics?
They are a little bit. I'm a little bit underimpressed with psychedelics. I think there's 2 cases where psychedelics are being used by, and I work with a lot of like high-level biohackers. So I see a lot of people experimenting on themselves, and I do brain maps in some people on request, and I have a pretty good informed perspective on this. But I think psychedelics have a couple problems. One, I think there's very little evidence that humans can have an altered state of consciousness and come back to ordinary reality with any harvest. The ordeals are ordeals, and they create shifts, and they break you free of your shape. But we're not really good at extracting insight back to our normal reality. It doesn't work very well with the heroic doses of psychedelics. The microdoses, the low-key irritation of plasticity that people are getting into, great. But there's lots of ways to crank up plasticity to 11. Lots. And I think most of them are more reliable, more reproducible, and less of a dumping dynamite in the kiddie pool for the occasional person the way a psychedelic could be.
Well, I guess that's a super interesting perspective that I haven't heard before. But my thought process was actually people microdosing and doing neurofeedback.
Right.
Or
and they do. They do.
Low-dose
But it doesn't
ketamine
really create more change than neurofeedback alone.
Okay.
Hyperbaric medicine by itself creates very small changes in the brain, but if you add it to neurofeedback, you double the impact of neurofeedback. But you have to be careful with the order. You have to dive last, or you cause problems when you mix them. And there's many other interventions like that where they actually stack. Neurofeedback increases the impact of almost anything you do dramatically, and a few things lubricate neurofeedback, like HBOT will lubricate neurofeedback pretty nicely.
Well, Dr. Hill, I feel like I'm gonna have to. You and I are gonna have to unpack a bunch of other stuff at some point. We are coming up on an hour. Ed, sorry if I interrupted or talked over you at all there, but do you have any other questions before we go? That stuff that we want to talk on?
No, Dad.
You guys want to reminisce a little more or something? Yeah, that's all right. That's all right. Know your role, son. But Dr. Hill, that was awesome. Really nice to talk to you. I think we should plan on having you back, and we'll unpack some other stuff there, because there's kind of a lot here. I think also, other stuff talking about like kids and ADHD treatment and also sports performance and post-concussive discussions. Like there's a lot there, but let's maybe
one little hint there is that post-concussion brains and post-COVID brains and post-Lyme or mold or chemotherapy brains all look really, really, really similar on an EEG.
Again, we have a lot to unpack there. That's not a
just to tease you.
That's not just to mess with me a little. All right. Well, hey, it was really nice talking with you. I really appreciate it.
You as well, Doc. You as well. Nice to see you again, Ed.
Thanks so much for listening to the Wild Health Podcast. If you want more daily health education, be sure to follow us on Instagram, which is filled with health optimization how-tos, grocery shopping lists, guided breathwork posts, myth debunking, and so much more. You can find us at Wild Health MD on Instagram.